My credentials are that this stuff has actually kept me alive, literally alive. It has helped me come back time and time again. And without this work, I know where I would be. And in some instances, in some parts of my life, it wouldn't be here anymore. People accept cancer. They're, oh, I'm so sorry, the chemo, tell me about that, God, are you going to be okay? Everybody rallies round. They do not say to you the sort of things that people say to people when they're depressed. Oh, you don't seem like the sort of person that would have cancer. Like, that's a ridiculous thing to say because we accept it happens to everyone. But they say, you don't seem like the sort of person who'd get depressed. Well, newsflash, it's not personality type.
Are we victim shaming people who suffer from mental health and depression and things like that?
Yeah, we are. I talk to people about the ABC of building this unapologetic confidence, this beautiful, healthy self-assurance. And the first stage is A, awareness. You can use these skills for good or ill, as we have seen again throughout history and currently. If you want to know who you are, start a business, because your triggers will show up all over the fucking shop, and they do. And you have to keep diving in over and over again and going, it's a failure, rather than I'm a failure, or that failed, but it was an experiment, it's okay. That is hard to do. Again, why self-belief matters.
Hi, Charlotte. Welcome to the show today. Let's start just, I suppose, getting to know you. So tell me a little bit about you, the work that you do, and why that is important.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'll try to answer that very succinctly. A bit about me. I often describe myself as an offensively happy failure. And this links into the work that I do and why it's important. Because what I do is I work with people to help them build this sort of unapologetic confidence, and which is really self-belief. We use the word confidence, that's how we think it shows up, but it's really about self-belief. And the reason that it's important is because this underpins almost every aspect of our life and often can help us be successful in whatever definition that means for us in every single area of our life, and how we show up with other people, for other people, in what we believe we deserve to work for, to ask for, to achieve. I often talk about silencing that inner critic and working with people on their imposter syndrome. And underneath all of that is what we term confidence. So it's really important. It ties into how I describe myself, because all of us have things happen to us that we do not choose and that we do not plan. And got a little TED talk on that I can plug later at the end if anyone's interested in that, talking about our chosen versus our unchosen adventures. And often, in order to get through those things, it's not about pushing through with this rather cliched view of resilience, but it's about learning how to have this self-belief that helps us keep going. And that is why it's important.
Yeah. I mean, before we talk about some things people can do, you mentioned there, we've all got, bits that we chose and bits that we didn't. And I guess they influence the way that we see the world and the way we see ourselves, and therefore how we act accordingly.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And I think what most people don't realize or appreciate is that we can only hold a very small amount of information in our conscious mind at any one time. They estimate between 5 to 9 pieces. So where does everything else go? Well, obviously, as we know, we have a subconscious or the unconscious, and that drives us up to 90% of the time. So this is what's underneath how most of us operate, and yet most of us don't ever kind of look under there and see what's going on and see if we could change the strategies of how we're dealing with things. And I kind of wanted to land that point, because I think a lot of us can self-flagellate about why we're not able to do something, or why we do this, or why we think that, or why we behave a certain way. Once we understand what's driving us, it's so much easier to make changes that serve us and the people that we love much better.
Is that why a lot of the time we have these sort of almost automatic reactions? Now, some are there to help keep us safe. We touch something hot, we almost pull away, and that's an automatic one. But equally, when something happens, the way that we react to it because I'm sure, I mean, I've done it and I'm sure other people, we react in a certain way. And then with a little bit of hindsight later on, you sort of almost got your tail between your legs and say, sorry,
Yes.
I overreacted there. That
Yes.
wasn't me. It wasn't a
Yeah.
big deal. I'm sorry. And that's just that unconscious automatically flicking in and taking
Yeah.
control.
Yeah, 100%. They, they talk about these sort of 19 directives, if you like, of the subconscious mind. And one of them is that it works on instinct and habit. And also the easiest, so the path of least resistance, which is really great news in a way, because it means that if we create new habits and teach it differently, then that will eventually become the default. But it's absolutely the reason we all, and I'm going to put overreact in inverted commas there, but we all react a certain way. Many people will
Mm.
be familiar with the work um, of the chimp paradox, that book
Yep.
which talks about the
Yeah,
chimp
great book.
brain or the animal brain, whatever you want to call it. And that's the way of understanding why we react. One of the reasons we react the way we do. And I think some people misinterpret that as like, oh, well, if that's just natural, then I can't change it. But a lot of the work that I do with people, if you want to call it coaching, to put a label on it, is about creating that slight gap between that stimulus or that activation of something that we then respond to and the response. And quite a few clients have said that what I've given them is that power of the pause. And it's not, it
Mm.
doesn't necessarily appear like a pause to many people, but it's just being able to be aware of what the instinct used to do or usually would do, what the default pattern would be, and then write it a new program so that you have this slight gap. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever heard, I think it was from a therapist I had years ago. They were talking about, in the context of making change and changing behaviors at the level, the deep level, not a self-discipline, self-flagellation type, but if you change at a deep level,
Yeah.
they said, if you get really good at this, if you practice it, if you get good at it, if it then becomes the habit of the unconscious mind, you'll probably be able to do this 80% of the time. And the 20%, you have to give yourself grace because that's human. And I'd like to say, I think 80% is optimal for most of us. I'm fairly certain I'm not operating like that all the time. But certainly there are things now that I don't even think about in the way that I used to, which is proof that it's different and I react very differently. So I hope that's hopeful for people as well as understanding the why we behave a certain way. And you're right when you mentioned not touching something hot because of safety. Bizarre as it sounds, almost every single behavior that we have is safety oriented. So every
Mm.
thought, every deed, the human being's job is to keep us safe and alive. So it interprets everything through that lens, not in your conscious logical mind, which is why we often do things that look like they don't make any sense. Because why, if I want this over here, why am I doing this? The secret to that is, to some part of you that makes sense, some small part somewhere. And what's beautiful is when you hear people. So a client said to me, one of my favorite quotes was, they said, never before I've been able to sidestep around my self-destruction. And they were saying this retuning, if you like, reprogramming themselves had enabled them to have that pause, not react in the ways that they used to, which would then result in a behavior that didn't serve them or people they love very well.
Wow. Yeah, you can see that people, I mean, whether we call it a fear of failure, or things like that, that people don't take those steps because their mind is just trying to keep them safe.
Yeah,
And I guess it
yeah,
leans back to
absolutely.
loads of other little actions that we take almost in our daily life, which, when you think about, are slightly, I don't know if it is irrational, a fair comment, but our brains are saying, you know, we're trying to keep you safe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
even down
looks
to, you
irrational.
know, with young people that really struggle just to make a phone call.
Yeah, yeah, but grown-ups too. I think this
Yeah.
is. It looks irrational, sometimes even to us. But the wonderful thing is, there's this concept in the work that all behaviour has a positive intention. Again, to some part of
Mm.
you, I talk about the part that's driving the bus, right? Inside of us, there's all sorts of bits, right? We are aware of that. You've talked about the characteristics that we all have. People label them good or bad or weaknesses or strengths, but I don't like to do that because I think I say they're things that serve us less well, because otherwise
Yeah.
it sounds a bit judgmental of ourselves when we're just really doing the best we can with what we've got at the time. But
Yeah.
I always think about the part that is driving the bus. Now, I love kids, right? 7-year-olds are fully joyous and they're wonderful. But if you want to be really compassionate to yourself and other people, try to remember that most of us, most of the time, our 7-year-old is driving that bus. And that's in our
Mm.
emotional reactions. And then our logical mind kicks in and starts to, we can convince ourselves in or out of any situation. But initially, some people might refer to as the chimp, but I like to think of it more like this kid who's great fun, but you don't want a 7-year-old driving the bus. So
No.
sometimes you have to think, who's driving the bus? Which bit of me is driving the bus here? It might be the part that's afraid. It might be a part that is frustrated, but it's nice because it allows you to think of yourself as multifaceted and not just, oh God, that was a terrible thing I did, I'm a horrible person, or I'm useless, or I failed. And that's very important when we're thinking about success and failure and the inner critic, because a lot of success is learning how to fail quickly, well, and not stewing in it and letting it impact us. So I like to think in those terms. And yeah, those reactions, they can become a lot less automatic. But as with anything, it requires a little bit, or a lot in some cases, of work.
I guess by having control of the reaction that we take at any point actually automatically projects some confidence in what we're doing and what we're saying. Rather than reacting to something someone
Yeah.
said, if we can take that pause and come back with a really well thought out answer, something that is what we stand for, rather than just being that 7-year-old, that does project confidence, because we see it in the way people present, don't we? And we see some of the great leaders over the years, they project that confidence. It's like they are in control, and they're almost in control of the room.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Now, I really want to make a distinction here about confidence. Well, a few, if I may. See,
Yeah, of
people
course.
often think, they say, fake it till you make it, or confidence is a result, not a requirement. And I want to make a distinction between a skill and a self-belief. So sometimes you could teach yourself to think you are marvelous at singing, for example, even if you were dreadful. You could quite easily create that neural pathway in your brain that thinks you're absolutely bloody brilliant at singing. I don't know if you're allowed swearing, by the way, but I'm very sweary.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
That was a mild version. So you could create that, but unless you actually put in the work to be a better singer or to do some practice, you'll never be any better at the actual singing. Now, that matters a little or a lot depending on what your choice of outcome is. So you
Yeah.
can definitely, and people do, build confidence by doing things over and over again and realizing, oh, I didn't die. So that's that part of you that think you're going to die if you do public speaking or karaoke or pick up a phone or any of those
Yeah.
things. You're teaching yourself each time, I didn't die. You're giving yourself evidence that you can do it. Now, that is a part of building confidence for sure. The part where, and I wouldn't say that's faking it till you make it. That's just trying to do your best to learn a skill better and showing up even when you don't feel like it. So maybe you're faking the feeling, if you like.
Yeah.
The part where this stops for me is that, firstly, energy leaks. So it almost doesn't matter what you say, how you say it, or who you say it to. If you are not feeling it, there's a part of people that may connect with that. When that
Mm.
famous quote about communication only being something like 7% verbal, it's often misused, but a lot of that isn't even about body language. It's about an energy that somebody projects. And we all know
Yeah.
what we mean. If somebody comes to an interview and they're really nervous, you can tell before they've opened their mouth.
Yeah.
And the level of that can endear us to them or make us feel a bit awkward, depending on the spectrum of awkwardness,
Yeah.
of nervousness, I should say. So that's why building this sort of deeper self-centered self-belief that is irrespective of how good one is at something And belief that one is worthy, even if one fails, is important, because that then translates to a real self-assurance, a real kind of, I've got this, and even if I don't, I'm all right, we're all right, I'm a human. That's a very lovely place to come from. It's a much more calm assurance. So that's the first point, is that people can kind of sense those things. So um, so that's really important. Yes, you can build skills. Yes, that does increase confidence. I know that a lot of outdoor things I've done, when I've got better at them, it's given me more confidence to do them more. It's very important.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that skill, there comes a point where it stops. And of course, we know that people can speak very powerfully and be talking absolute bullshit, but people can have confidence
Yeah.
in them because they have confidence in themselves. And that's,
Yes.
in my opinion, that's not good. That's not a good thing. That's how we end up
No.
with leaders that we might not wish for, or people having
Yes.
influence where we think, why do people listen to them? And because they're connecting with them. So that's why I'm very passionate about genuine self-belief and confidence and assurance that comes from a really healthy place. A common misconception is, oh, but if I'm confident, won't people think that I'm arrogant? I was like, firstly, some people might, but mostly that's a reflection on them. But secondly, if you're that sort of person that thinks that's why, it's never going to happen. But also, if you're building a real genuine self-assurance, it won't be seen as arrogance, because arrogance actually comes from deep insecurities. So I hope that is reassuring to anyone who thinks, oh, then people think I'm too big for my boots, or this, that, and the other. Quite frankly, you can't please all the people, and someone's always going to think something. But the more serious point is that genuine self-belief is never arrogant.
No. I guess there's a couple of bits in there. I mean, I have heard it said, you've got to be a good communicator to be able to explain your concepts and whatever it is that you're doing. And I often see this, that actually, technically, in whatever work it is that you do, if your skill set is a sort of 8 or 9 out of 10, but your communication is a 3 out of 10, actually you're not going to be seen as an 8. Yeah, you're going to be seen as a 3. But equally, you were just making the clear point there that actually there's lots of people who actually their understanding of something is quite low down, and their ideas are a bit, but there isn't really an idea in there, but they're a great communicator. And therefore everyone gets bought into, oh, wow, this sounds amazing. What did they actually say? Well, I'm
Yeah.
not quite sure.
You just want to follow them, and
Yeah.
the great orators of history. You can see this, and that's important, because no one's perfect. But that's
No.
why the authenticity is important, but the integrity is important, because you can use these skills for good or ill, as we have seen again throughout history and currently. That's really important. I wanted to say something about communications, because for over 20 years, I was in strategic communications, and marketing, public relations, which I still do on a consultancy basis sometimes as well. So a lot of this really feeds in really well. And I want to give the listeners a practical resource. One of the best
Yeah.
books I've ever read is called Never Split the Difference. And it is about negotiation. And
Mm,
what's incredible about this book is it talks about, because obviously that's all about communication, right?
yeah.
And he talks in the book, for those who don't know, this person was in charge of hostage negotiation at the FBI, and then went on to work with Harvard Business School. So this person knows their shit, basically. And
Yeah.
they, if it's good for somebody who is trying to save somebody's life, it's good enough for me. Now, I knew a lot of the principles of the things he talked about, but he also gives some very practical ways in which we can, in his lenses, negotiate. But as he puts at the beginning of the book, everything's a negotiation. Getting your child to bed,
Yeah.
deciding what restaurant you might go to. I mean, we're not saying you have to employ these things, forensically to everything, but he very much talks about managing one's emotional energies, so that you can then be more in, I don't like the word control, but if you are in more control of that interaction, which, if you are negotiating somebody's life, is obviously very important. If you are going to be activated by and react very badly to something somebody says, that's not going to go well for the hostage. So this is why it was important in their work to really understand that. And also, once you understand that, you can focus on them. All of your energy then goes into figuring out what they're really saying, what's underneath what they're not saying, which is a lot about coaching as well, is what are people not saying? And he calls these the unknown unknowns, these things he called black swans that we're really trying to get information from. So I wanted to land that as a kind of practical, go and
Yeah.
pick up this book. This is really great. You'll see all the science behind it. It has saved lives. It's not just fluff, etc., etc.
It's a fantastic book. I've read it myself, and like you say, whether you're in business and you're negotiating deals and things like that, and therefore you can implement some of those bits, because you mentioned marketing there. Quite often, it's about actually uncovering the real need of someone,
Mhm.
finding out, what actually their issue is, and trying to read between what they're saying and what they actually want, or
Yeah,
whether it's exactly like you said, just trying to get your kids to eat some vegetables and go to bed on time. We can start to implement these bits. So I think one of his examples is when he was buying a car, and how he managed to get a great deal on it. So we can all implement these stuff
yeah.
just within our daily life, regardless of, most of us are not negotiating the release of someone, and
No.
their life is at risk, but we can put these into just daily practice.
And I just want to speak to, I think some people worry that if you are learning tools to do this, it's manipulative. Well, this is on us, right? Like I said, these things can be used for good or ill. You said marketing, that is a great example. Sadly, most of the marketing in the world is heavily uses the lack principle, so making people feel
Yeah.
that they lack something in order to then say my thing or our product, service, whatever can fill that void. And of
Yeah.
course, like you say, we need to understand where people are coming from, what needs they have, but understanding a need and saying, I see you in that need, I understand that need, I can help with it, is very, very different to most marketing and advertising throughout history, which is you lack X, you need this to be better.
Yeah.
And you can see it in everything. I mean, when I did my degree, which is in public relations, it was very interesting because we had all these exercises, and I realized I have a real defiance against advertising. Now, I should say I am very human and just as susceptible as everybody else. But because I have awareness, it makes me really cross. And then I'm much more unlikely to buy the product if I feel any of these things. And that leads nicely into my point about the ABC of this work. Talk to people about the ABC of building this unapologetic confidence, this beautiful, healthy self assurance. And the first stage is awareness. So what you see, you cannot unsee. And there's quite a lot of adverts, that are logos that have hidden things that you don't see
Yeah.
until you see them. It's the same with our minds, if you want to call it that, or our subconscious. So yeah, you can use this for good, you can use it for ill. And once you understand that the world is designed, as Matt Haig beautifully says, to depress us, because happiness is not good for the economy. Because if people are happy, they don't buy your product to make their life better. So it doesn't mean you can't sell anything, but it does mean it makes those of us with integrity and want to do sustainable, ethical business. It makes us really consider how we communicate. And you know what? It takes a lot longer. It's a lot harder, but we're not making people miserable or having false promises in the process.
I love this idea of an ABC. So A is awareness. And you've mentioned there that, because we don't know what we don't know,
Yeah.
so it's just having an awareness of things. What's B?
So B is where we break it down. So when we have awareness, we might also look at another B, which is beliefs, which is one of the things that drives us, beliefs and values. But that awareness stage is, what is our inner mind saying? How do we behave? What does that say about where our priorities are? What might we like to change? All with a very compassionate lens. And the B is then we start breaking it down. So we start looking at these components, these areas, these themes. This comes up a lot. This comes up a lot. I constantly say this. My language betrays how I think about this. My actions talk about this. So in order to then move forwards, which pieces will I tackle first? How are they interlinked? So we basically start breaking that all down and looking at some of these beliefs in more detail and changing them. So I think Many people will know, we have heard of conditioning. We're all conditioned, and we usually, our beliefs are set before we're about 7-ish, and our values between then and around 12, 13. And it doesn't mean they can't change. It just means that first we need awareness as to what they are, and they can be quite obscure
Yeah.
about everything. And then secondly, we need to say, well, what would I like to believe instead? What belief would serve me better? And then we start to create that. We basically restructure that. And I've spoken before about the neural pathways in the brain. So we have, there's tools and exercises and things that and how we work, which basically break down the old belief and put a new one in its place. And that is then what makes the difference, because most people come to this work because they want to change a behavior or an environment or something like that. And they'll be working really hard, maybe. I usually use physical analogies. So I use the gym. You're like, right, I
Yeah.
want to lose weight. I want to look better. That's a behavior. That's an environment. So I'll go to the gym and I just need to do it all the time. And I need to really like go at myself. And it's really hard. And this work is hard too. But it can be easier if you look at any beliefs that you have. If you're finding it especially hard, is there a belief that you actually can't do this, that you're never going to be fit, or you don't deserve to be fit, or that people like me don't look like that, or people like me can't do that thing or achieve that? And if that is a belief, you will find it harder no matter how much work that you do, because you'll always be fighting that. And that belief might start to sabotage you. And then you start to think, oh, I'm just not disciplined enough. I'm failing myself. So it's not the behavior and the environment is what we want to change, but the belief is often where the behavior change actually happens.
Do you think beliefs are slightly harder to change now? Because I've certainly noticed it. We grow up with these beliefs, whether it's around money, whether it's around relationships, around politics, or anything like that. And now that information is so easily accessible, but equally there's so many different algorithms in our sort of social media feeds that we almost just get fed what we already know, and we end up with a viewpoint because that we like things to agree with us, and therefore we keep seeing more of
Yeah,
it, and therefore we don't get any of those other
yeah.
beliefs. So
I'm going to use an extreme thing to make the point, but that takes us on to the C, right? Which is
okay.
where we create the conditions. So I do work with people, which some people are like, it looks like magic. Are you a witch? And that's kind of some of the deep stuff where I'm helping them with their subconscious, and I can help them shift state within 5 to 10 minutes. And that often can make a change for them going forwards. But there's a personal responsibility bit where we have to go, okay, how am I creating the conditions? So we often talk about, if you've got a seed from the garden centre and you put it in a pot on the window and you gave it a bit of water, it would probably grow a bit. If you took it away from the window, it might grow a bit less, depending on the plant. If you give it flower food, if you tend to it, some people would say, if you talk to it, if you sing to it, I do not have green fingers, so this is not me. I am terrible. If you give it much more sunlight, if you prune it well, if you do all of these things, it will grow more or better. So whatever the conditions are for that plant to thrive. I know orchids are particularly tricky, but if you put them in the bathroom, apparently they do well, but outside they wouldn't, whereas a rose is different. So again, you create the conditions that you want to thrive in. And you can do that through lots and lots of things. You talk about the easily accessible of information. I'm going to say, if I wanted to go and find evidence, in inverted commas, that the world is flat, I could probably find that, because I am looking for it, and I will find it, and I will find some, excuse anyone that believes this, nutter on the internet that has evidence that that is true. I will see it through that lens. I will then convince myself. That's a dramatic example, but you can find evidence for anything. So you then create the conditions by finding evidence of what you need to believe is true. If it's not in yourself, you find it elsewhere. So one of the tools, again, giving this to your listeners as a practical thing, I give to people is an evidence board. I'm like, collect evidence like rigidly. And I had this great big board, AO or something, When
Yeah.
I started my business, who would ever come to me? Why would anyone come to me? There's so many other coaches, blah, 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 blah. So I put all the evidence of where I was really good. I had good testimonials before I kind of started to promote myself. In the middle of that board was the fact that I got distinction for my practical assessment. So it's evidence from somebody else that I could do this. There was all these lovely quotes. There was things where people had said I'd help them. And I looked at it every day and I made myself read that every single day. I haven't looked at it other than for training purposes in at least, I don't know, 5 years, because I don't need it anymore because I changed that belief.
No.
But I found all this evidence. I also found evidence of other people like me who'd been successful. Somebody said to me the other day, what if I don't have any evidence that I can do the thing I want to? I said, well, think about the qualities that might be required. And you've definitely got qualities that are evidence that you can do things. Maybe you're a parent. Well, you're raising a human, one of the hardest jobs alive. Maybe,
Yeah.
there's lots of things where you have evidence that of successes, or where you didn't give up, or where you did give up when it was needed to give up. All these things that we
Yeah.
need to believe about ourselves. Go and find evidence. And the beautiful thing about science of the brain, so there's this thing called the RAS, the reticular activating system, and it is the part of the brain that filters. And if you tell it, go and look for X, it will find those things. You are then much more likely to see these things. This is how stage hypnotists often work. I think they're amazing, but they're very careful in their craft. They use this to prime us before we get there. So they are, unbeknownst to us, they've probably, say you're walking along and at the tube, they've probably put lots of adverts up that don't look like adverts, maybe colours, animals, things, places, people, so that on the way, loads of people are seeing these things. This is going into our brain subconsciously, all of the time. And then they say, tell me how many people are thinking about an animal. And, if you've seen all these pictures, you start noticing all these pictures again, subconsciously. So it can happen like that. But it's even more powerful when you direct it where you want it to go. So if I told you to do a traffic survey, count the green cars, you would count all the green cars, and you'd come back to me and I'd say, tell me how many red cars. You probably wouldn't be able to tell me because
No.
you've been looking. So that's how that works. So you
Yeah,
create.
it's similar with the cars when you get a new car, or you're looking for a new car and you think, oh yeah, I might get one of those in blue. I don't see many in blue, and then suddenly the following week everyone seems to have one.
That's your RAS, basically.
Yeah.
And so that's how easy it is to do it, even when it's not something important. So it is so powerful when you direct it. It's the science, if you like, behind the phrase, today's going to be a good day. And I heard, I think it was Hannah Fry, who's a well-respected, excellent human being. I think it was her who was saying you can direct your brain to see things. So start your day with the phrase, today's going to be a good day. It still might be a bit shitty, but if you've decided it's going to be a good day, you're more likely to see the good things. It's not rocket science. It's not an exact rocket science, but this is how the RAS works. So that's where, to your challenge, if you could find evidence of anything, yeah, you can. So you choose. You decide how you're going to nurture this plant, which might be this new belief or this new activity, and you keep it away from people that want to. I'm trying to think of a polite way of saying this, but people who want to kill our joy. That's about them. That's often not about us, and we expose it to people that will nurture it. And as they say, you're the evidence of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Now, these days, that includes online. So you cleanse your social media feed. You decide to follow things that are directed towards the things that you want or help you believe what you want. I, for example, follow Goodable, Making Sense of Science, Good News Feed, all of these things because I can't watch the usual news because I find it very traumatic. I do get a newspaper's daily bulletin, and that comes into my email, but then I can choose when I'm feeling strong enough to read about the events of the globe, and then I go, right, I'm taking responsibility for my state. I'm going in and saying, right, I'm going to read what's going on in the world now. I'm not just allowing it to come in. So that's a way that I create the conditions that I want, because otherwise I'd probably never get out of bed and I just spend the whole day crying about everything that's going on because I'm quite sensitive and empathetic. So I'm like, no, I will not start my day that way. I start my day with today's going to be a good day, and I might get up and do something that brings me a bit of energy. And if I'm feeling strong enough at some point to then read the news, then I will. But I will not allow it to just come into my feed. And that's taken a long time. I used to work in a
Yeah.
press office in central government where we had no choice. So it's also a bit of rebellion as now I do not have to watch the news all day, every day, and be working at 6 a.m. with the Today programme. I will not do it.
I mean, I made a similar change to myself of, I wouldn't view the news. No, this was about a year ago. In fact, it might have been after last October. I just remembered that every day it was just sad news, and I knew it was going on. And I wasn't trying to, to say, oh, yeah, out of sight, out of mind. But I didn't need it at 7 in the morning, just as I'd got up. And I decided to do other things, and I'd read a bit of a book that I had, and just start my day that way. Because then I just found, otherwise, if you started with some really
Mm.
negative news,
Mm.
well, my mindset was, oh, I mean, what is the point?
Well, that's your
Because
RAS as well. So that's
yeah,
where you're priming it, and that's why there's in all the I'm going to sound slightly sarcastic now high performance podcasts, but they all talk about what's your morning routine and what you do, and none of them pick up their phone and watch the news. None of them.
no,
They all
no,
take, and I hate the word control. They take agency for how they start their day, and some people are not as affected as us, and that's fine. But what you've done there is you've decided to what I would call resource yourself better for the day, which then actually, in my case, certainly resources me better to read about the bad things or to watch those things
yeah,
because I want to remain a committed and engaged citizen. I just, there's a meme that says, my life is a constant balance between wanting to remain an engaged citizen of the world and not wanting to just run away and just live in a yurt in the woods. This kind of,
yeah,
and we all need to find that balance and everyone's is different. I'm not perfect. Mine might not work for you, but you know what you're like and what your balance is. And that's where you can decide, I start my day like this. It gives me a bit more energy to then cope with whatever comes down the road, whether that's the news or whether that's a child throwing up on you or whatever, or traffic jam or a broke down car, whatever it is, if you've
yeah.
started in a way that's better. And I'm not talking about, an hour of yoga and then another hour of meditation,
No,
an hour of
no,
journaling. I mean, all those things are wonderful if you can do them. I do a variety of self-care things, for example, in the morning, but you can do very small amounts. You can do
yeah,
little bits that create the conditions. Just remember that your brain, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not a bad human if you start your day in a way that doesn't serve you, but you're just responding to habit. You're just responding to the path of least resistance, which is what your subconscious operates on. And with a tiny bit of effort, and a few minutes a day, you could start the day differently. So that's,
yeah.
that's
I love
it can
that
be as
about
simple as
the
that.
morning routine, because yeah, there is very very much, if it's the bro hustle culture, and if you're not up at 5 a.m. and have already done 10K and an hour journaling and things like that, then you're wasting your life. It's just not realistic for the majority of people who've got they're working hard, they might have children or family members to look after or whatever, but we can always take a little bit of time in that morning to
You
do
can do a
something that serves
percentage.
us.
So I think
Yeah.
that's the thing, isn't it? There's, well, I'm not deriding any of these things per se, right? If I could start my day with a 3-hour self-care routine, then I probably would, because actually those things
Yeah.
are good for us. It's
Yeah.
just, I think there's been a backlash because so many people are giving unrelatable advice.
Yeah.
And that's not where I want to be. But I am saying that, look, if you start from the principle that some movement is good, that a lack of screen is probably good, that being outside is probably good, you could just take a couple of minutes and do or a bit of reflection is good. You might just write one line of today's going to be a good day. That might be the only thing that you write. You don't
Yeah.
journal for an hour, and then you step outside, even if it's cold, and just feel a bit of fresh air, get some of that daylight onto your retinas, which is also shown to help with performance and sleep. And then maybe you just walk around the block. And if you can't do any of those things, maybe you try and fit them in somewhere, or you do one. Because most of us
Yeah.
have a habit that we do. And even extremely busy people that I do work with, single parents and people like that, they're able to do one thing, one small thing out of all those things or a version of them that just helps them feel a little bit better. Because remember, we're not trying to, you know, I don't know, we're not trying to necessarily be like all these people who we say are the most successful rich people ever. We're just trying to increase maybe our contentment or our happiness by maybe 1%. So if you just do one small thing, it will make a difference.
Yeah, there's a lot of the time when actually most of us, we don't necessarily want that, like you say, to be in that top 1% of the 1%. Actually, we just want to feel a bit better than we do currently. And that's
Yes.
sort of it. That's the
Yeah.
aim, just to be a little bit better, feel a little bit more content, and enjoy life a little bit more. We don't have to be in the top.
And a lot of that is in our minds. And I'm not saying this is not a toxic positivity. I hate the word mindset, just for anyone who's thinking, oh gosh, can just think better. It's not about that. But again, you can direct your thoughts and with some effort and with a bit of habit into things that serve you better. And it's like you said, we don't necessarily want the 1%, but we may just need to get a bit more comfortable with the concept of enough instead of more. Like what's enough for us? Our enough might look different to somebody else's, and that's okay. And also comparisons. A lot of this unhappiness often comes from comparisons. That's not a blame thing from me. That's saying the world is designed to depress us. Happiness is not good for the economy. So of course we're designed and marketed at to compare ourselves with other people and therefore want more. But if Matt Haig's beautiful book, just he talks about this very briefly, and he says, it's almost like being happy with your own non-upgraded existence becomes a revolutionary act. And it doesn't mean you can't upgrade some part of your life, but just being able to say, yeah, I'm all right, actually. No, I'm all right. No, I don't need that. No, if I put on a bit of weight, it's fine. It panics lots of people because that's where confidence comes in again, because often they can't understand. That's why people have sometimes been to me like, how are you so happy? Because they look at all the things I've been through in my life and they're like, it's not offensive. They don't mean it offensively. They almost be like, "What the actual fuck? Like, how can you have this outlook, or be this person, or have this energy?" And I'm not saying it's because I'm a marvelous human. I'm not. But when I start talk, sometimes when I give people workshops and I explain some of the tools I'm going to use, I say to them, I'm not just a coach that went through a process and learnt this stuff and it works. Nothing wrong with that. These things do work. My credentials are that this stuff has actually kept me alive, literally alive. It has helped me come back time and time again. And without this work, I know where I would be. And in some instances, in some parts of my life, it wouldn't be here anymore. Like, this has quite literally helped me survive. And I talk a little bit about some of the qualities that came into that in my TED talk and how I developed those, because I just don't believe that some people are born good at this and other people aren't. That's just not true. I want to give that as hope to people. I'm not a better human than anyone else. I'm just as susceptible to all sorts of things, good and bad. But because I have this awareness, I've worked incredibly hard to survive, I think, for want of a better word. And now I'm still not perfect. I get activated and triggered and all of the things, but a lot less than I did, and a lot more less serious a way. And I make a lot better choices than I used to do. And that's not to shame my past self. She was doing what she knew back then. But now I know better. I can do what serves me better and what keeps me here. And that is what I say to people. That's my credentials. And I list the sort of things I've been through. I'm like, now you see, now you understand that this is a human being who's used this to basically succeed at living. If you want anything less complicated, whatever else I failed in, I've succeeded in staying here, which has been super tough sometimes.
Charlotte, that's really, really powerful, and the way you explained that there. Do you think that's why because you've spoken with such passion today about, helping other people and giving them confidence and changing the minds? Does that stem from the fact that if you hadn't been able to do it for yourself, this would have been
Yeah,
really serious?
yeah. I mean, I'm very happy to briefly some of the things I've been through. The people who don't know, who are listening, yes, in a way, I've been driven to learn things and do things to help other people because I've been helped. So that's been really great. So, for example, after I'd had the first instance of extremely severe depression in my 20s, I became a Samaritan when I was better, because I knew what it was like to feel suicidal. I knew what it was like to have those thoughts and not have anywhere to go and not have anyone to turn to. And I never understood before depression until I had it. And you can talk as
Mm.
much as you like about it, but people still don't really get it. And when I got cancer when I was 39, I became even more passionate about mental health. I used to say all these other things that happened to me, which I can mention in a minute. In between them, this sort of bookended, if you like, by mental illness and depression, severe depression 3 times, and cancer. And the difference is that people accept cancer. They're, oh, I'm so sorry. The chemo, tell me about that. God, are you going to be okay? Everybody rallies round. They do not say to you the sort of things that people say to people when they're depressed. Oh, you don't seem like the sort of person that would have cancer. Like, that's a ridiculous thing to say because we accept it
Yeah.
happens to everyone. But they say, you don't
Yeah.
seem like the sort of person to get depressed. Well, newsflash, it's not personality type. Or, oh, do you really think it's cancer? Do you think maybe you should just maybe go for a run and you feel a bit better? Again, this is parodying to show that this is a sort of, maybe if you just drink a bit of green tea and yoga, yeah, that'll cure it. Oh, are you sure you want to do that chemo? You were sure you want to take the drugs? Maybe you could just talk to someone. Now, talking to people is incredible, by the way. And every time I got better from depression, I had therapeutic support, firstly on NHS and later privately. And I also did have pharmaceutical drugs, basically. Very well researched, thankfully for myself, privileged to have been able to do that. And, very well supported. So I'm not, every time I post about this on LinkedIn, someone goes, oh, did you then just realize that life was better? And I was like, no, I did not. It was a screaming, crying, tragic mess. I didn't just go, oh, you know what? I'll change my mindset and it'll all be fine. No, I went to therapy. I screamed through therapy. I've been in very, very dark places. I have extremely dark places, but I did the work and I took the drugs. And it's really important that people know that that's okay and that it's not shameful.
Mm.
And that's a really important part of the message, because I say to people, cancer was almost the least worst thing that's happened to me. It is awful. It is horrible. The treatment was miserable. I'm very glad I'm still here. But depression, clawing my way back to mental wellness, remains the hardest thing I have ever done. And I think most people will ever do. And a lot of the science behind how our brains works is behind the science of how we coach, because it's psychology, it's neuroscience, it's how the brain works. And coaching was developed by therapists whose clients had kind of got well, if you like, and they'd moved forwards, but they wanted to help them move forwards again. So they used all this knowledge about how our brains work to go forwards for success. So I think it's all linked, for sure. And a lot of what I've been through, some people feel shame about, mental illness, multiple miscarriages and operations, childlessness, all of those things which kind of make up the identity of a woman sometimes. Even the word miscarriage, implies you have done something wrong. Marriage breakdown, failure of divorce, all of these things I speak about to show that they could happen to many people. And people often have sympathy and know much more what to do when somebody dies, for example, or when you have cancer. But when it's a bit more less understood or a bit more awkward for people, divorce, for example, miscarriages, and I think it's a lot harder for people to relate. So I write about it, I talk about it a great deal, and every time I do, somebody feels seen. And it's just interesting. I want people in those places to feel seen in the way that people feel seen when, for example, someone dies and we give them sympathy. Because also my best friend died at 36. My dad died far too young. Like, I've had a lot of death as well. So again, the difference in how people show up is not because they're bad people, but it's because we don't, as a society, encourage these discussions and talk about the human experience. And I just want to help people have a better human experience. I think one of the most poignant things for me is that when I was quite young, I got engaged quite young, not to the person who became my now ex-husband, who's a lovely man, but I was engaged before that. And it was a very unhealthy relationship, and it was extremely violent. So it ended up with domestic violence, and I stayed. And you hear a lot about victim blaming and why did they stay instead of why did they hit them.
Yeah.
And when I was thinking about this self-belief and this confidence, I realized that I stayed because I didn't think I was worth anything more. I thought that it was me, or that I deserved that, or that if I just stayed harder and tried a bit harder, this would work out. And,
Mm.
rather than thinking, fuck this shit, I'm worth more than this. That's what I want people to think, whether you're leaving a bad job, a bad relationship, standing up for yourself, having boundaries, responding to a bully. If you have such a core level of self-assurance and belief, people can't touch that as much. Sometimes they still get in because you're human, but no
Yeah.
one will stay in an abusive relationship if they have a really deep self-belief, because that's what people don't understand. Someone hit them, why didn't they just leave? Very simple for you to understand if you are quite self-assured. If you are riddled with insecurities and doubts, and that person has played on them and makes you feel crap and then is violent, then that's just evidence. Your brain is seeing that as evidence that, see, I'm a bad person, I don't deserve any better, because you don't believe in yourself. And that, I think, is something I think about quite a lot. It could save people from themselves and from bad situations, both in work and elsewhere.
We are starting to have more conversations around mental health and things like that. But do you think we still need to take it even more seriously, from the fact of, like you say, when someone gets cancer or gets something else, one, we've got sympathy. Equally, if they go through some treatment and it doesn't work, we don't blame the person. We just say, oh, that treatment didn't work. But it does seem like with even mental health, but whether someone's, I suppose, even down to like drinking or taking drugs, if they relapse, that's them, rather than, well, whatever support they got didn't work, let's try something else. Do you think we need to start, are we victim shaming people who suffer from mental health and depression and things like that?
Yeah, we are. And I don't think that's anyone's fault. I think it's this narrative we've been fed that if you work hard, you will be rewarded. If you are a good person, life will treat you fairly. Now, I believe that everyone deserves and can have a good life. I've been through a lot of things. I think most people have at least one thing that I've been through, but very few people might have the whole lot. And I'm sure
Mm.
life is not done with me yet. But as I sometimes say in my talks, thinking that life will treat you fairly because you are a good person is like thinking that a lion's not going to eat you because you're a vegetarian. It doesn't work like this. I think, traditionally our heritage is, well, more recently, I would say, this kind of Christian thing. We have this Christian work ethic. Nothing wrong with that. We all want to work hard. But it is not true that all your hard work will be rewarded in the way that you want. We learn this in business, right? This is,
Yeah,
business.
yeah,
As I say, if you want to know who you are, start a business, because your triggers will show up all over the fucking shop. And they do. And you have to keep diving in over and over again and going, it's a failure, rather than I'm a failure, or that failed, but it was an experiment, it's okay. That is hard to do. Again, why self-belief matters, right? But yeah, we are victim blaming, and that's not these individual people who are blaming's fault. This is because they believe, it's a belief that we have been fed, that because it works, right? It works for some. Otherwise, everyone would feel pretty despondent. Well, what's the point? Somebody could say, then what's the point? I was like, well, the point is that it is more likely that you will enjoy your life if you are working towards something that you enjoy, or you're doing things that give you energy. It is more likely you will get a good result if you put in the work for that exam. Of course, nothing is without effort, but to think that effort definitely equals a certain level of reward is really dangerous. And I think it's a nuance that it doesn't sell either, right?
no,
It doesn't sell, does it? Buy my thing, you'll get a result if you work hard enough. I mean, we just know from women's bodies versus men's bodies that everyone's bodies are different, that hormones impact
yeah,
us differently, that neurodivergence impacts us differently. You may love this analogy. When I have challenged people on their thinking around not just mental health or mental illness, but people's capacity. When people think they just haven't worked hard enough to get better, or someone just didn't work hard enough for success, we know that success is not about luck, but it's also about qualities that you may or may not possess in a greater or less degree, like appetite for risk. Some people's appetite for
Yeah.
this is a lot better. That may make them a better entrepreneur than somebody
Yeah.
who doesn't have that appetite. And people seem to believe that things you can't see, things that are in our subconscious and qualities, if you like, they seem to believe that they are less inherent than physical characteristics because you can't see them. Again, it's this belief that you can create an appetite for risk, or you can create something else that makes somebody good at business. And I always say to them, okay, tell me a sport you like. And people say, I like running. I'm like, so why aren't you an Olympic runner? And they say, oh, well, I don't have the genetics. Or, oh, well, I would try, but I'm probably not just gifted in that way. And I say, then why are people's brains any different? Just because you can't see it, you have no idea what people's brains are like, and they're all so different. But again, because we cannot see it, we accept that I'm not going to be an Olympic weightlifter. Like, we accept that, and some
Yeah.
people will, but they are the exception, right? But people think,
Yeah.
oh, you can just become these other things that you can't see. And it's just not true. You can become better or more of, but some people will naturally be better or more predisposed to, I'm using risk just as an example for business, but for mental, you asked me about mental
Yeah.
illness. So some people's brains are more designed for some things than others. And what I want people to know is the third time that I was depressed, which thankfully is quite a while ago now. I was a coach with all of the knowledge about how the brain works. I'd been in therapy before. I'd had 2 instances of severe depression. I had made it through. I had worked hard. And still I judged myself, even with all of that knowledge, because my brain was not functioning at its most optimal. It was in a bad place. So by the time you're in it, it's almost too late, even if you did have the faculties. Not too late to get better, but too late to balance yourself out so you don't sink lower, which is why therapeutic support is so important, and the support of other people. You are not functioning optimally. And I still judged myself for taking the drugs, even though I knew that they would help me. I likened drugs to, I broke my leg very horrifically, and I had to have a wheelchair, and then I had to have crutches because I couldn't walk properly for 3 months.
No.
I liken the drugs in my case to like having a wheelchair, just enabling me to be steady enough to look at the things that had caused my mental decline. That's it. And then
Yeah.
when I had done my physio, or my therapy, as it were, then when the muscles were better and working more functionally, I was able to then come off those drugs. And again, physical analogies are so useful for this stuff, because people it's so much easier to judge what you can't see and make assumptions.
Charlotte, thank you so much for your honesty and insights today, and actually your use of analogies, the way that you're able to explain some quite sort of complex and tough things to understand, actually in a way that actually we can all relate to. And you've certainly fired up a light bulb in my head of going, yeah. And I certainly thought I was quite open to a lot of this, and you've even sort of challenged me and given me some things to consider. So
Oh, my
thank you for
absolute
joining
pleasure.
me today.
And I
And
want to say
I've
to
just loved
people,
our conversation. Go
I
for
have
it.
too. I want to kind of end on a couple of things. Firstly, well, a few things. Firstly, you're not broken. You don't need fixing. All we're doing here is unlearning stuff which we learnt without even any choice, right? So that's the first thing. It is possible. And there are certainly people that would pretend that this is easy. This work is incredibly simple, but it is not easy. I, again, use an analogy. I say you wouldn't show up to a personal trainer and go, right, I want a 6-pack by next week, and expect to have it. You've got to change your nutrition, and you've got to show up for your sessions. This work is no different. Okay, you gotta start with your beginner. You've got to learn how to suck. You've got to learn how to like fail and get through the pain of the discomfort and all of those things. And then your six pack will emerge, should you choose it to. But I talk about the 4 C's of any of this work, right? Firstly, consistency. There's gentle little bits incrementally. I've done this work now on myself and others for, it's going to be 20 years, right? And what people see now is what has been a consistent shifts, teeny tiny shifts over all of these years. But I've kept going towards that. So consistency, that's 1 C. Commitment, you've got to want it to feel different. You've got to be committed to making a change. And then that will help. Courage, because you are unlearning things and it is uncomfortable. And then compassion is the most important one. Be kind to yourself. It is simple, but it is not easy. It isn't easier for other people. Don't compare your chapter 1 with someone's chapter 20. These are really important. Consistency, commitment, courage, and compassion. And when you are more compassionate to yourself, you will be to other people as well, which is, of course, very important.
Charlotte, thank you so much once again. Very insightful. I've learned lots, and keep doing the work that you're doing, because you're going to make a difference to people's lives. So thank you once again for joining me.
My pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Balanced Ambition podcast. I genuinely hope the stories inspire you as much as they inspire me. If you found value in today's conversation, please share it with a friend. And remember, by subscribing, you won't miss an episode, and it would truly mean the world to me. Stay balanced, and I'll see you next time.